Sam, why is Mark Bradford important?
Mark Bradford is one of those artists that has been pushing the boundaries of painting in so many different ways. Because in terms of the material that he uses, in terms of his take on abstraction, in terms of how he grounds his painting practice in very important socio-political issues, there's a lot to discover, and that makes him one of the very important artists that one needs to look at today.
But when you arrive in the exhibition, you co-curated. In fact, we don't completely understand what are the work made of.
Well, basically, depending on the work, Mark uses a lot with found materials, with repurposed materials. There's canvas, there's DIY store materials, there's rope, there's cardboard, there's glue, there's gypsum. He's an artist that is really making his hands dirty in the process. There's end papers, which are from the hair salons.
From his mom.
From his mom, when he was working with his mom in the hair salon. I think there's a lot of layers to discover, literally and metaphorically, when you look at these works.
But in fact, he's producing painting without painting.
Yes, because the application of the paint or the color itself is not, in a sense, the end point in the work. It's only one of so many layers. I think layering and a cumulative approach to the surface, it's almost working like a sculptor, because he's got all these layers on top of each other, and then there's an element of sanding that goes on, there's an element of ripping that goes on. So I think he works almost as a sculpture when it comes to creating these large two-dimensional surfaces. But as you saw in the show, one of the reasons why also Mark is very important, to go back to your first question, is that he is pushing the form of a painting. So it's not just a two-dimensional flat surface hanging on a wall. It could be a three-dimensional object that forces you to move differently in the space. It could be a surface on which you literally walk, which
Yes.
is one of the works that he created for the exhibition Float.
But I thought it was done before, in 2019.
Well, in the past, he actually created them as waterfall paintings that were either hanging vertically or horizontally on walls. And this is the first time that he created as a piece, a floor piece that you actually walk on, which is the ultimate act of subversion in a museum, and something that makes our conservators extremely uncomfortable.
And so what do we learn in this exhibition compared to what we knew already from him?
I think for us it was important to reintroduce Mark to a younger generation of Berlin arts goers, audience, and most people only know the large-scale paintings of Mark, and we wanted to show all the different practices in his kind of very, very multifaceted career. So we are showing sculpture, we are showing film, we are showing small-scale works, we are showing the large-scale paintings, and the title of the show is a very important indication of what to expect. The title is Keep Walking. And the trigger for this title came from the first two paintings that you see in the show. There are paintings that Mark did recently, and one of them was created for the exhibition, of timetables of trains from the 19th century, early 20th century, to kind of echo the Great Migration, a movement of African Americans from the south of the US to the north, fleeing Jim Crow, fleeing slavery. So it was a moment where people decided to keep walking. It was an assertive action, putting themselves on these trains, and these trains were a tool of liberation. In our case, to connect to our milieu, to our location, in the Riekhagen at Hamburger Bahnhof, which used to be a train station, the train and the network of railroads that are still around this building and were connected to this building were used as vehicles of oppression and destruction and death. People were forced to get on the trains against their will and told to keep walking, put your head down, and they were led to their death. And I think this contradiction, in one case modernization is a symbol of liberation, and in one case it's a symbol of regression, was a very strong starting point for us, and a very strong way to reflect on how the body experiences public space, how the body is forced or has the freedom to move freely. Which brings us to Mark's personal biography. As a man who's more than 2 meters tall, he's always felt awkward in his body. As a man who has a black skin, he always feels that people associate certain things onto him without even knowing him. And as a queer man, he always feels that there are certain prejudices against him, even in his own community. So the body is the first surface through which you experience all these things and you connect with the world. And that's where the importance of creating an exhibition where you walk around the works, you have to duck under, you have to step on something, you walk through corridors, you open up to bigger spaces, was very important. The central role of the body in Mark Bradford's work.
But he has kind of pessimism, right?
I think he's got a lot of humor and a lot of hope.
Humor for sure, but when you look at the work, at the end of the day, there's kind of sadness.
Yeah, perhaps I actually think they're always an opening to hope. I think he acknowledges the sadness. One of the works, Pinocchio is on Fire, is a homage to 27 people that he knows who died of AIDS in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a lot of references to what it feels to be oppressed because of who you are, the body that you live in, the skin color that you carry. But I think the ending always has hope in it, whether it's the work about the AIDS epidemic where he puts on an act like a stand-up comedy act. He uses humor to tackle these difficult issues despite the sadness. And at the end of the work with the film Niagara, when you walk out of the exhibition, Melvin, a homeless gay person who lives around the park very close to where Mark Bradford's studio is, he leads us out, and despite all the challenges, he's strutting his stuff and walking with confidence, and we start walking with him. So I feel the sadness is there, the tragedy is there, the Roxy that was lost, you know, the famous nightclub also. So
Yes.
there's a lot of remains, there's a lot of ruin, but there's also a possibility of a new beginning. I
And
think,
also the end is the little boy which was at walking, which was at the Venice Biennale.
yes,
When he,
yes,
on his
Melvin.
pavilion,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
will look like him in fact.
Yeah.
Merci.
Je vous en prie.